Hey everyone, this is Marketing Live. It is Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm your host, Tim Jones, the Associate Vice President of Clarkson University's Marketing. And today on Marketing Live, we are talking about working with in-house agencies and all the fun things that go into working with, for, and managing creative talent inside an internal agency. And today we have some of the best in the industry at doing that, just to go through some of those challenges. Today we have a couple more notes before we get going too far. So before we meet our guest, just a couple housekeeping things. So Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live Network, a series of professional development web shows and podcasts, which are always free and accessible to you in the archives at higheredlive.com and on iTunes. Be part of our broadcast by tuning in live and sharing your insights, questions using the Higher Ed Live hashtag on Twitter. And you can receive weekly updates with live show dates and times by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. And of course, today's show would not be possible without the support of Clarkson University and M. Stoner. Higher Ed Live, Marketing Live, and all of the Higher Ed Live programs are produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding strategy, web design, and more. Marketing Live is also sponsored by FormStack. FormStack is a robust online form building solution with intuitive drag and drop interface. The platform makes it easy for marketers to create branded, mobile-ready web forms without writing code. Build donation forms, contact forms, event registrations, and more with the web's only 508-compliant form builder. Publish your forms and leverage FormStack's social media plugins to maximize your traffic. With in-app analytics and integrations with popular marketing tools, you can get even more out of your captured responses. Visit www.formstack.com to learn more about the ways FormStack can double your response rates. Again, I'm Tim Jones, and this is Marketing Live. Today, we have on the program three wonderful guests. I'm really excited about the conversation we can have with creative agencies and in-house agencies, and I will introduce you as we get going. So I'll start with you, Doug. Doug Gopinski, is that right? Did I get it?
Yeah.
All right. Is a strategist with M. Stoner, and Doug is going to be representing the sort of outside agency perspective, as well as talking about working with internal agencies in a variety of capacities. We also have with us Vanessa Correa, who is the creative director at the University of California, the Office of the President. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi.
And then we have Vicki Arp, who is the the Director of Creative Services at NC State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hi, Vicki.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Is everyone doing good? Excited to talk about internal agencies and have fun?
Always.
Super excited.
Excellent. So I'm excited about this topic because I've worked in a handful of different structured organizations. Some with the one-person shop serving as the internal agency for the entire university, others with larger, more agency-style groups for creative services. And it seems like in higher education there are a lot of different setups and structures and models, from the one person to the genuine pure agency dynamic where internal clients are requesting projects, the agency is essentially estimating them, writing creative briefs, delivering the work, and then billing clients in a real pure vendor-client model. Some hybrid models are halfway between the two, where some work is billed, others not, some services cost, some don't, and then sort of the first-come, first-served model, which is more a first-come, most important model, as we know, but we'll get into that. So, as a way of introduction, I thought it'd be good for Vanessa and Vicki in particular to talk about the organizations that you lead and work in. Just give us a sense of what they look like, what kind of positions are there, how it's structured, and sort of what that business model looks like. So, whoever, maybe Vicki, go ahead.
Okay, so at North Carolina State University, we're set up as the central marketing and the creative arm of the university, but we also have an in-house chargeback function. So we work with campus peers to produce communications that are on brand and meet larger university goals and the individual unit goals. So we do a sort of hybrid model of chargeback and non-chargeback function. So we're moving to a more digital focus, and as we do that, we find that to have creative staff that are effective in their roles, we have to generate more income in order to support their salaries. So the only way we can staff at the level we need is in lean budget times is through receipts. So from the creative services and web communication wings of our team, we're probably doing about 70% non-paid work and about 30% paid work. So we have staff that provide creative functions from photography and video. We have developers on staff. We have designers, project managers, and content creators that are writers and strategists.
Excellent. So Vanessa, what does it look like at the system level?
Yeah. So we're at the central office for all 10 University of California campuses, and about 5 years ago they restructured. There was the communications function was distributed around the building. They consolidated that and created an in-house agency, but we don't follow any of those models. We don't charge anyone, but we do function as an in-house agency. And I think some of the things we'll probably get into a little later are problematic for us because we don't charge. So prioritization becomes one of our biggest issues. What work we do, what work we don't do, simply because we're free, and so that's an ongoing challenge for us. Now, the way we're structured, we are the creative services. The creative group is part of a marketing communications group, and in that group we have print designers, interactive designers, developers, multimedia producers, content developers and strategists, and some straight-ahead, more editorial news reporting style writers. Our sister groups within our broader division are federal government relations, state government relations, public affairs, and alumni affairs. So we work very closely with them. And we are essentially that marketing face, or ostensibly we're the marketing face of and the marketing work for all of for the external relations division. So that's kind of how we're structured.
Excellent. So, Doug, from your perspective, what are you seeing most industry or most partners you work with? How are they structured? Is it a pretty diverse mix, or is there a trend to move one way or the other?
Yeah, it really, I don't think there's a trend. I mean, we work with everybody from community colleges to the Ivy Leagues, and we're not even always working with the same department. So it would be pretty common that we would work for creative services or marketing communications, but sometimes we're working with web communications, or sometimes we're working with like a school within a bigger university, a school or college. So you know, we've seen a variety of mixes, and I don't think that there's one single recipe for success. I think that teams that do charge back tend to have a little bit more leverage on projects. So, you know, in other words, when there's no chargeback, there's not a whole lot of leverage to push back and say, you know, we really can't do it this way. So, you know, that's something we've noticed or heard from clients, but it doesn't mean that you can't succeed without chargeback. It's just, you know, I think it gives you a little bit more power in the dynamic with the client.
Yeah, and here at Clarkson University, we don't charge at all either. It's an interesting change from the places I had been before. And one of the questions that we get around this sort of to bill or not to bill is, does billing actually create a scenario where the organizations or portions of your institution that already have significant amount of resources are benefiting the most from it? Is it a haves and have-nots scenario? And how do you manage that? How do you deal with that, the reality, I guess, that if they don't have money, that maybe they don't have an opportunity to work with even the internal agency?
I mean, from our perspective, our technical team actually works that way, and it's hugely problematic. And it's exactly the scenario that you're describing. In some ways, I actually find, I mean, there are issues of prioritization and leverage, but I find that not charging actually in some ways lets us pick who we're working with and help them think strategically about the work that they're doing, regardless of whether or not they have the budget baked in for that. It also gives us a lever to say, well, this isn't a great idea, and oftentimes they don't have a budget, and so we're not going to do it, and you're probably not going to do it either. So.
From our point of view, I'm sorry. Supplement when projects are important to do for the university. So if a campus peer came to us with a project that was very important for us to do and that would move the needle and was very important for to get our brand out into the marketplace and to make sure that we're getting wider recognition, we would supplement or reduce the cost of that project in order to get it done. We're going to take on those projects that are necessary to expand our market position and that make sense to push forward North Carolina State University as the great educational institution that we are. So we hybrid that. We take on we try to only take projects in-house that will do that to some extent. And there are some projects that we have to take, and there's some projects that that we take or that we recommend in order to move the needle. So in the best case scenario, we can do both. We can bring in revenue to make sure that we have the right people in the right positions, and at the same time we are creating great creative and doing strategic work. So we like to do integrated campaign work versus one-offs, and a lot of those one-offs we push out to vendors but we counsel on them regardless. If the one-offs are a bad idea, we're going to discuss it with the client and try to come up with a solution that's a better idea for them.
Yeah, likewise here.
So how do you have that conversation with a client who is deemed not strategic enough for you? I mean, nobody likes to be told, hey, you're not really that important, so we're not going to do it. And I think that exists in both business models, the chargeback and the non-chargeback. So how do you have that conversation? And I know, speaking from experience, and sometimes what we do is we call vendors, or we call mStoner, and ask them to come in and have that conversation for us. So I'd be curious on Doug, how that works out for you guys, as well as Vanessa, how you handle that.
Yeah, so is the question what's a more favorable setup, or what do we see as a more favorable setup as an agency, or
more how do you have that conversation with the smaller portions of an organization or the less strategic ones when you come in and they're saying we need equal attention as well, but they're not necessarily strategic? And so a lot of times what we'll do is ask vendors to sort of shoulder that awkward conversation so that we can say, well, you know, our vendor said that you guys aren't, you know, homepage material or top of the fold or, you know, commercial warranted or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's a little, I'd say it's easier for us as an outside vendor because we're usually going to be around for a year or two, and then we may have an ongoing relationship, but it's a little bit easier to say no to people when you don't have to work with them for the next 5 years, 10 years, however long you stay at your current institution. And I think there's also, you know, our bread and butter project for us is a full institution-wide relaunch. So we often have kind of executive backing on the project, like a VP of PR and advancement, you know. So we usually have an advocate that reports to the president or the chancellor, and prioritization is kind of like part of what we get asked to do. So you know, it's not fun to say no to people, but there are definitely circumstances like that. And I think one thing that we try to do is listen to everybody. So you may not be able to say yes to everybody, but you can listen to everybody.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much how it works when you do have to work with them for 10 years? Or is there another component to that?
For a long time. So the answer for me is if the project is harmful to the brand, then we're going to shut it down. We're going to find a way to help them find a solution that is going to help meet their goals and meet institutional goals. So we're going to help shift the conversation towards something that is more productive. And if the project is something that they need and that they are insistent upon and is not particularly harmful, then we will likely find a small vendor from our approved vendor list or a freelancer that can help them with that. And at that point, we then continue to provide some level of oversight, which can, which is also a bit problematic. I mean, it brings its own problems to the table in from a capacity point of view. I spend a large part of my day reviewing creative of all levels of success and providing counsel about how to make it more successful, or in some cases just you have to pick your battles and let things go at times. But we would never send somebody away completely empty-handed. That is not a good answer, and everybody has a need to communicate, and so you need to help them do that in the fashion that is most helpful for the institution.
Yeah, I agree with everything Vicky's saying, and in large part that's how we handle it as well. The question when something is non-strategic or somebody comes to the table and says, we've been doing this for 20 years and we want you to just do it and keep doing it, trying to move the conversation so that we're asking questions about what do you think you're solving with this, why are we doing this way, and being able to even just very quickly throw out other alternative ideas. Usually that moves people off of their position and gets the conversation rolling. One of the challenges we have at a system-wide level, not being a campus, that I think other folks may not have, is we sometimes work on projects where the people we're saying no to are 10 campuses. It's a committee or it's a group, and they're coming with us with a project and saying we want to do it this way and yada yada yada, and we're trying to get them to align with the brand, and that's very challenging as well, especially if they're speaking with a system-wide voice. This is very important for us to be aligned with the brand. And those can be very tense conversations. They can be very intransigent, and it can be sometimes very uncomfortable. But at the same time, I think to Vicky's point, we have to. Part of my role and the role of our unit is to constantly be thinking about the health of the brand in the marketplace, and if this is going to damage that in any way, then we really do have to kind of stand firm and try to find alternate strategies to keep that conversation actually open and going. But again, just like Vicky, I think there are times when you have to pick your battles and say, all right, this isn't going to actually hurt anything. It's not great, but we're going to have to just keep moving. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So it's a lot of the balance is not just saying, no, we're not going to help you, you're out on your own, but sort of providing alternatives or different recommendations or a set of just something else to keep people moving forward. And to some extent, there's always the compromise for whatever reason that exists. So Doug, I'm curious, how much do you guys have those conversations away from campuses where you're saying, we really don't want to do this, but we have a lot of whatever political reason to do it, and you find yourself in that sort of compromise scenario? I mean, because we just assume that vendors don't compromise, that they just come in and say, here's what you're going to do. If you don't like it, we're leaving. But I suspect it's not quite that simple.
No, it's not that simple. I mean, I think we work exclusively in higher ed, and it's a smaller pond than you might think. I mean, people tend to know each other. They go to the same conferences. And I would say that our number one thing is making sure that our core client team comes away happy. So we always want to do great work. I feel like we do great work. I feel like some of our new creative is amazing. But taking care of the relationship with our clients is really, really important. So there is some compromise. There are some concessions that you have to make occasionally. But I think, again, we have it a little bit easier than in-house agencies in that we also have the benefit of usually a pretty well-defined contract of what we're going to do. So sometimes these initiatives will come up, or people will say, we really need to do this. And we say, well, we can do that, but we're going to have to issue a new contract or a change order or that sort of thing. So I just think in a lot of ways it's another case where an out-of-house agency has an easier setup.
So I'm curious how on the build side with you, Vicky, and Vanessa, with you, how do you manage those scope changes? Because what Doug's talking about is there's at least some way to manage that, and I think on the non-build side that would be pretty difficult, just to say, hey, well, this isn't what we talked about, but we don't have really anything to work with. So how do you manage those scope changes?
I mean, for us, to be totally honest, frequently it's related to politics, how we handle that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's the president of the university saying the scope is changing, we say, okay, scope's changing, moving on. If it's a department who has gone from, we're doing some sort of online strategy that we're executing against, and all of a sudden they've decided that they need to have, a whole, suite of print materials that go with it, and an event, and so on and so forth. We do have that conversation, even though we don't bill, even though we're in-house. We do sit down and say, look, the scope's changing. Why is it changing? What pressures are you feeling? How can we figure out how to do this in a way that is not going to push other people's work, down the queue, and our own work? So, frequently, and I guess this is one thing that we didn't really say at the beginning, like the work that we're doing is driven, I kind of see it being driven in three buckets. One, we have, presidential work that's coming out of her office that we need to address, and it tends to be very strategic and pretty sprawling. Mm-hmm. We have work that we generate ourselves, marketing, communications work. We come up with the project, the strategy, the creative brief, the execution, and we have things like the visual identity that we developed a few years ago, and a whole. I mean, the list goes on. We don't have clients that we're working with in the building, mm-hmm. And then we have our departments, our colleagues throughout the building who are coming to us for those specific departmental needs, and that's where a lot of this prioritization conversation and tension seems to bubble up, mm-hmm. And figuring out how we're going to manage the work, make sure that it's strategic and on brand, and is the best use of resources. So, that's kind of where we land with that.
Can you guys still see me? I'm sorry, my window dropped out, and so I can't see I'm flying blind. So, sorry.
You look great.
From our point of view, sometimes scope change is a good thing. Sometimes you get through part of a project and you have found a better solution, mm-hmm. and so sometimes scope change comes in from internal. We change the scope partway through the project, and sometimes scope change does come from external sources, and if it is a good idea, we sit down and talk with the client, and we alter the creative brief accordingly. And there have been times when we've gone all the way through a project almost to completion, and the client has changed the scope. And the reality is, we are forced to, by our nature of our budgets, charge for that work and then sort of start over. But we have that conversation very openly with our clients. Mm-hmm. I actually have one of those right now where we're pretty much starting over with a project. Mm-hmm. That often happens, in my experience, when the team within your client group changes. So there's a staffing change is usually where that's driven from. Mm-hmm. Just having that open conversation with a client. Obviously, if the scope has completely changed, you're probably not going to meet the initial deadline. Mm-hmm. and the clients understand that. They're not, in most cases, they are not living in a world where you can get everything all the time. You can't have your cake and eat it too, and they know that.
I mean, we find that the scope changes mostly on the projects that we're initiating for ourselves. Like,
right.
Right. It's us. We're our own
with a better solution.
Totally, exactly. I mean, because we create a creative brief for the projects we're working with our, we call them clients even though we don't charge them. The clients in the building, our colleagues, that has really helped. I mean, getting them acculturated to this notion that there is a creative brief. You come in, you make some decisions about what that project is based on a strategy, and then you kind of hew to that creative brief. It's been a major culture shift here. but it has helped, and it works. Now, we're not quite so disciplined with our own selves, but, but we do. I think that those are the places where we're playing a little more, and we give ourselves a little more latitude to do that exploration that Vicki's alluding to, and let the project kind of grow. And we learn things along the way, and there you go.
One thing that we're working really hard on right now in university communications is creating realistic schedules for things that we know are coming up. So we know we have a non-flexible higher education calendar. We know when certain events are happening and that there's things that we just have to do around those, and we have to create marketing communications around those events to capitalize on momentum. So what we're trying to do is create schedules for, right now we're working on a 2-year marketing schedule that creates space for both our chargeback work and our central work in order to allow plenty of time for ideation and to come up with multiple solutions so that we're being smart and not always reacting, because that has been a problem in the past where everything is presented as a priority. You have to, I mean, and that, quite frankly, is always going to be the case for clients and for administration, that they're going to present everything as equal priority, and that's our job as leaders and as project managers, because we have a new project management team that's doing a wonderful job of creating set processes to let our teams be more agile, but at the same time build that time in to ideate and to think, which is the hardest part. If you're just always reacting, then you're never thinking.
I could not agree more, Vicki. Ditto everything you just said.
So I want to jump back to something you mentioned, Vanessa, because I think it comes up a lot, is this idea of politics driving decision-making, and particularly around projects. And one of the perceptions that comes with internal agencies occasionally is people either have tried to work with an internal group or are hesitant to work with an internal group because the perception is, well, they're just going to, the president asked them to do a bunch of stuff, and so we're never going to get to the top of the queue. We're never going to get our work done. It's always going to be delayed or bumped. How much truth is there to that perception, and how do you combat that? How do you ensure that you balance those things out, particularly, I don't know, when you rely on their dollars? And I know, Vicki, there's those things that come up that I'm sure you guys have to divert resources and change paths. How do you deal with that perception, and how do you repair it if it's there?
I mean, for us, we're actually knee-deep in this conversation with leadership right now, which is essentially how do we make our internal process of prioritization understandable for the folks that are in the building. And again, speaking very candidly, part of there are people who are here that are very excited to work with us. I mean, we're producing great creative, we have great ideas, we're executing at a very high level. All of that stuff is fantastic, and these people want to work with us because they know that we're going to produce something really, really great for them. And we do have other folks who are a little bit anxious because they know that we've got a lot of work going on, and they're worried their project's going to get kicked to the curb. But truthfully, it's a question about prioritization and having leadership understand what our role is. We're set up to really function as an in-house creative agency, and doing a lot of the production service bureau, Kinko's-esque kind of work, we have tried to remove that from our queue. And that has caused a ton of consternation for obvious reasons. That work needs to happen, and right now what we've done is created a stable of outside vendors who we work with. We templatize stuff. We always have our hand in. We know that what work is going on. We keep our eye on it, make sure it's on brand. But we have positioned ourselves as a strategic partner for the folks in the building and for the president, and and the work that we're doing is intended to underscore that. I don't know how any university at any scale is ever going to have enough resources on the marketing and communications side to actually meet the need. Mm-hmm. So I feel like this is just sort of endemic to actually working in-house anywhere. The list of projects will always be 6 times longer than the ability to execute them. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's always going back down to this question of prioritization and being able to communicate why we're making those priorities to our colleagues so that they understand, and so the conversation becomes a little bit more fluid and less, less confusing for them. Mm-hmm. And again, we haven't always walked that walk. We've sometimes let politics buffet our decision making. So often we're doing a project that makes no sense to anybody, and other folks in the building see that, and we know why we're doing it, but nobody else does. But it creates distrust. So we're mm-hmm. constantly trying to like I said, we're right now in the middle of really trying to clarify that and to remove some of the vagaries of decision making from our own decision making. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of where we are. It's a little bit more of a complicated answer maybe than what you were expecting, but no,
I think it points to how complex the issue is and how difficult mm-hmm. it is to sort of negotiate and manage through, and how I don't know that there's not really a perfect answer at all, which is one of the reasons that we end up working a lot with outside vendors to help manage that sort of volume and that capacity and that mm-hmm. sort of, we're not quite sure where we fit, and sort of that balance between production and strategic consulting and bringing in others to help us on both fronts. And that's something I did want to talk a little bit about, is this balance between production and strategic. So you mentioned Kinko's. I used to laugh. We used to talk about not wanting to be Kinko's with an attitude. So not only are we not only are we just churning things out, but we're also difficult to work with in the process. And that's definitely not where you want to be as an in-house agency. But there's a lot of value in some of those projects, in mm-hmm. some of that production role, and I think it's a necessity and something that I know here at Clarkson and everywhere else that I've worked, we've struggled to kind of find that right balance of how much do we take on that is more of a sort of a production capacity versus no, we're not going to do any of those things. And so I'm curious on how you guys, and Vanessa, you started to get into this a little bit, but how you balance that and what's right for the university. I mean, what's the better service? Or is there an answer to that question?
I'm going to let Vicki jump in first.
Right, I'm happy to jump in there. I actually had a very similar conversation today with my boss about this sort of thing, and in regards to business cards, which is my favorite thing in the world. But what we've done is created partnerships on campus with people that can produce some of those crank it out templated type of solution. So we do have a copy shop on campus, and they are the ones that are fulfilling that need when it comes to stationary business cards, which people do need, and there is a valuable purpose for those items, and so it's certainly not something to turn up your nose at, but at the same time I think it would be detrimental to the forward momentum of my staff's growth for me to put one of my designers on cranking out business cards once a week. So I would prefer that we didn't take on that type of work ever. But we have we do have peers in IT that help populate and advance some of our web templates in order to provide some of our departmental level campus peers with good on-brand web solutions. We want people to move towards digital communications and not be printing off flyers for every type of communication that they want, because we did have a print culture here that we are trying to move away from, both from being a modern institution point of view and also from a budgetary point of view. It's a much easier to push your messages out quickly in a digital space than it is through brochures or newsletters or any of those sorts of old school communications. So we have created some templates that we are pushing out into the campus community in order to provide that sort of crank it out work. At the same time, that creates its own challenges. I spent some time on the phone today doing some tech support for some of our templates, which is probably not the best use of our time, but at the same time, people need help. And so we have to be realistic about the campus community. We are a big campus, and we have a lot of employees that with varying skill sets. So that's not fun. But we also have templates that we use for recurring jobs that we know are coming in that we use internally. And those are helpful. We can get jobs done more quickly because we have created one design that we then just update as needed.
Yeah, I would also, I mean, we also have templates, and we struggle all the time with trying to, you know, not diminish the value of the work on a practical level. We're required by law to submit, I think, a bajillion annual reports, and I think that's, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a bajillion, and legislative reports and reports to the regions and so on and so. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, and you know, we've templatized that and in large part reduced the number, you know, down to essentials, and that was a big step, and cost savings and so on and so forth. We've also templatized some of the more functional website work that we need to do, and that's been helpful. But again, like Vicki said, it results in its own brand of work that needs to happen, which is support of those templates or adjusting those templates, or they go, you know, people do all sorts of crazy things to them, and sometimes they just don't work. You know, templatizing things sometimes doesn't actually function for in as broad of a way as you want, and so there is a certain amount of customization that is required. But, you know, for us, in terms of, you know, going back to the question that you asked earlier, you know, what is the best value for the university? You know, I feel pretty strongly that having a very involved and strategic team that is guiding at a high level, like an actual agency in-house, is absolutely a value for any institution. You know, paying those salaries is absolutely worth it, because what you get is you get people who are deeply knowledgeable about the brand, about the problems, about the story, about the issues, the specific issues, and are able to spin out creative that that addresses it in maybe in definitely in a longer term way, where you can see the creative having a certain depth that doesn't happen if you outsource all of that thinking and all of that work. And now there's lots of ways that you can model that. You can have a small group of people that are bringing on agencies and are directing that and basically making sure that that story is happening in the way that you want, or you build that team in-house, which is what we've tried to do. But again, you know, it's hard. I mean, that we get asked to do a lot of stuff that is, you know, yesterday I had a designer, his email to me was, "I'm going home, all my projects are boring." You know, like, you know, it was 5 o'clock, like, let's be fair, but he was just like, "I'm bored."
So he wasn't quitting.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm bored. I don't know if I mentioned I was bored. So, you know, you don't want that. I mean, you know, we built a team that was really designed to make great creative work, and you don't want them spending their days, you know, just making banners. And so, you know, there's a management issue there. There's just a strategic issue there. There's a practical issue there. So, you know, I think it's a really interesting question, and you know, we could probably talk about it for another, you know, the rest of the day. But
so Doug, when you guys come along an organization and you find, talk a little bit about working with those different dynamics. So there's the in-house agency that's typically a production shop and what the balance is with them, but I think probably more interestingly in some ways is an agency that is an in-house agency that is providing that consulting and strategic service, and how you guys at ImSonar work with those teams.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we have way more interaction on the strategic side than on the production side. So I know that there's resources or, you know, designers in-house that are doing a lot of production, but we're typically dealing with people that are more, you know, in a leadership role.
Mhm.
So sorry, it sounds like kind of a cop out. I just don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, you know, what I would say is we all get stuck doing some production. I mean, I've been with the company 7 years, and I still have to do production. I mean, I did a 700-page content audit earlier this year. You know, if that makes you feel any better. So I guess, you know, one of the things that I think about is there are just times when you have to buck up and be a good soldier. And I think what we all try to do as strategists is to place ourselves in situations where we can do strategic thinking a little bit more often. I think one of the ways that you do that is to try to get known by the people that you report to as somebody who provides strategic thinking. Because I feel like then what happens is, as the two kinds of work come in, they choose you for the strategic work rather than handing you the production. Or they listen to you when you make a case for sourcing the production to someone else or creating a new resource for production.
I agree
That's
with that.
yeah, that's dead on. Yeah. So I want to move away from the process and management and some of that challenge and talk about a little bit more about some of the fun stuff, the actual creative and creating some remarkable work, and particularly with this group of people, because the three of you represent, I think, some of the absolute best creative work in higher education at this point. And so there's got to be something. There's got to be some way that you can explain how that happens, how you keep the quality so high. So I know with NC State, it's the ongoing brand refresh. With University of California, it's the Onward California and a bunch of the branding stuff there. And with mStoner, it's every client that you guys have. So talk a little bit about how you keep the creative quality so high, particularly when you're dealing with all of this sort of, I guess, the lower budget stuff and the production stuff and the personnel issues, all of those political challenges. How do you keep it moving, and particularly how do you keep creative evolving? Are there any secrets, or is it just you have the most talented people and it's just lucky?
That's it. Just luck.
Next question.
All right,
Next
moving
question.
on. Yes.
From our point of view, at least from my point of view, I think we keep the quality high by not letting the staff succumb to the desire to crank or meet minimum expectations and keeping people engaged. We have great, talented, motivated staff, and so those day-to-day details are what kills you, right? It's what crushes your creative spirit, and so we have staff that just do that. We have a great project management staff, and they're awesome, and they are high energy, and they work hard to make sure that the creatives don't get bogged down in those day-to-day minutia that kills their souls. So, and they work with the clients to make sure that they also are understanding. And so the project management staff who is fairly new to us, and we've hired a great manager on top of that, and she's doing an amazing job there, work to anticipate client needs and to help the creatives get through that day-to-day stuff. So by building that buffer in, I think we've really improved our process and stopped killing our creative souls. But at the same time, our brand refreshes really help because it helps almost all of our staff, not everybody, but almost our entire staff was involved in the brand refresh and in the website that we pushed forward, and that helps them to understand the brand better and to be engaged in that. And they help create it, so they own it and they love it. So, and we know that brand is going to evolve over time, and it's not done, and it will never be done. And so if we look at the brand itself as ever being done, that's how we keep people engaged, just by saying it's never done, you can always evolve it, and there is no finish line. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about hitting that finish line because it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, you know, that iterative idea is also really important for us. I mean, the team that was put together here, establish the visual identity, the brand platform for the system. There wasn't one before, and so these are the people who made it. Again, honestly, it is really hard to keep everybody happy and keep them engaged and to recruit new people. I mean, I feel so lucky. We have an incredible team, and I know that they could go tomorrow and go work at top agencies in San Francisco. Like, there's no question. But and we're in a context. Most universities are not design focused, creative focused. They don't understand really, like, top administrators don't really understand why it's valuable to have this. They just kind of, it's a thing that happens over there, and occasionally something pops into their into their eyesight, and they're like, oh, that's interesting. So it's hard. It particularly in a market like San Francisco, where there's a ton of competition for top creative talent. Mm-hmm. It's hard to bring them on board and have them understand the aspirational vision we have. And I think that notion of an aspirational vision is part of the reason why our team has stayed together and is producing the work that it does, is because we share this aspirational vision of what the university could be, how it could talk about itself, how it could represent itself, and we're constantly trying to find new ways of doing that. So it's super challenging. We try to generate projects that are for ourselves, that are hard, or at least hard, and at least hard mental problems to solve, but they're fun. So that those projects that we have, we can, we really spend a ton of energy and put a lot of passion into them. And then, and that kind of offsets, like you said, everybody's got to be a good soldier, some of the less exciting work that everybody actually has to do. But it's probably the hardest part of the job, is keeping everybody engaged and excited about producing work at a very high bar, because in universities, I mean, let's face it, it's easy to let that bar go down and everyone's still happy. Like, it's not like we're getting any pressure from anybody else to be producing amazing work. That's pressure we're putting on ourselves entirely. The expectation, they're excited when they see something that just doesn't look like a mess. Ooh, right. So
I think I've got 3 ideas to contribute on the quality creative front. One is, I think if your team is consistently producing good creative, usually you have a team that, for a given project, understands if you're going for a wow design or of course design. Because I think that there's 2 ends of the spectrum, right? One is the design that drops people's jaw. It's really interesting. It's got new design patterns. It's got boldness to it. And the other end of the spectrum is something that's very utilitarian and minimal and clean. And you almost don't notice the design or the language at all because it's so usable that you're not even thinking about it. So I think almost all projects should fall on one end of the spectrum rather than in the middle. And knowing up front, going in and getting agreement on which end of the spectrum you're trying to hit usually helps. I think number 2 is tenacity. Like, I think, probably speaking for the other people on the call, if you're producing good work consistently, you wouldn't believe the amount of good work that gets thrown away. So concepts that never make it, ideas that never saw the light of the day. But most good creative teams I know are incredibly tenacious. They just keep muscling through, even though good ideas a lot of good ideas never make it to print. And 3 is QA specifically. Like, you're talking about quality and how things make it to market. At M. Stoner, we actually have a QA manager, and she's responsible for kind of shepherding the number of eyes on the work at any given phase in the project. So I think we're fortunate to be able to have room in the team for that, because I know that helps the quality of the output in a lot of our own work.
Yeah, I think that's really good insight. I think hitting either end of the spectrum is a really interesting concept, particularly as you think about pitching to senior administrators who you sometimes you have to read the room, sometimes you have to know what you're going for and who you're trying to sell on the work, and there's nothing like success to drive that sort of creative spirit either. Having people really like what you're doing always helps quite a bit. So we just have a couple minutes left today, but I did want to give everyone the chance to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the most ridiculous thing you've ever been asked to do, because we deal with people who aren't naturally or necessarily creative or insightful, but as we know, everyone's a marketer, everyone's a web designer, everyone's a web developer, advertiser, etc. And so I'm sure that every one of you has a pretty interesting story about either the most absurd or ridiculous thing you've been asked to accommodate or project. So you don't have to name names unless you think it would be hilarious, but even then, I don't know that it's a good idea. So I'm just curious, what is it? And I'm happy to share any of mine too. And since I worked at NC State for a little bit, I may overlap with Vicki a little bit, but I don't know, levels of absurdity.
The one I picked from that is not you weren't here when I don't think we've had this request. So at the beginning of my career at State, we were doing invitations for a sporting event, and one of the photos on it was of a female basketball player in action, and I got feedback, and this is from a very high level. You can read whatever you want there. That the players didn't look feminine enough. Okay, so she was playing basketball, and could we Photoshop them to fix that? And I was the designer on the project, and so I was really tempted to just Photoshop like a purse or some high heels on her, or a bow on her head. She was driving in a basket, you know. But I feel like I thought about that a little bit today, and I think that story just highlights how important authenticity is in your messaging, because there's beauty in powerful places, and we don't have to Photoshop lipstick on basketball players to tell our story.
Amen. And real quick, my short story is working at NC State. We had an administrator who did not like that the sky was routinely Carolina blue in photos. Not quite sure how to fix that one, but yeah, and I know Vicki was.
We don't get a lot anymore. We used to get that a lot.
Oh man,
that one sort of passed.
That one's crazy. Well, how about you guys?
You can't change the color of the sky.
I'm literally just I don't even know if I can parse out one specific incident. I mean, just recently, you know, we were doing an admissions like recruitment, you know, sort of pop-up banners, and we had these beautiful photographs of you know, portraits of all these people that were just like gorgeous and bright pops of color, and you know, it was diverse and everyone was beautiful and fantastic, and they were like, well, we don't like that this isn't a group of people. Can you replace it with a building? I was like, oh my God, you're recruiting people. You just, okay, yes, sure, we'll just put a building in there. That's super appealing. That's great. But like, yeah, I could keep going on and on and on, but I won't.
I think I'm lucky to have such a poor memory, because I think I blacked out a lot of horrible stories, and I feel like I had 10 stories at my fingertips 10 years ago. But I do have one. I do have one that was recent, and that was a client who told us that they needed HTML. So we were negotiating some deliverables, and they told us that they only needed HTML. We said we had a deliverable that was HTML and CSS, and they told us, well, we know we need HTML or CSS, but not both. So it's a little nerdy, but you know, hopefully you guys get that one. It's basically most web pages have you need both HTML and CSS, and this client got a little mixed up, and they thought that they only needed one. So
you're trying to cut costs, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I always say when we want type to fit into a existing page, just cut every other word out. That's right.
That's good advice.
Every other word.
Yeah, or you know, give them just the HTML, a page that looks like a page back in '96. Right?
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
Fantastic. Well, I know we all deal with that, and that's part of the fun of it, is that it's part of the art of what we do is to make everyone better by taking those ideas and saying, you know, if it's the building you need to show, let's let's think about how we might introduce that into the piece, or with HTML and CSS, maybe an opportunity to explain the distinction between design and content and how those things interact. And I don't know, Vicky, I'm lost on that one. I think that was just you probably did the right thing, putting by not addressing that one.
You had the purse.
No. I sure hope not. Well, that's all the time we have. I want to thank my guests, Doug Gopinski from MStoner, Vanessa Correa from University of California, and Vicky Arp from NC State. Thank you. I think this has been a great conversation, and it'll be archived on YouTube and on higheredlive.com if you want to watch it and share it, and to show your boss all the nice things you've said about him. That's always great as well. And thank you always to our program sponsors, MStoner, and to FormStack. That's it. Thank you guys very much, and hit us up on Twitter for Higher Ed Live all the time. I'm Tim Jones, and this is Marketing Live. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right.